Greetings and a warm welcome to all the viewers. U Channel presents the 17th monthly edition of Autism Awareness Series in association with Autism Society of Udupi, featuring our guest speaker of today, Dr. Hari Subramanian. We welcome you all, sir.
Thank you.
For this show. We are privileged to have with us our esteemed guest, Dr. Subramanian, Vice President of NeuroNano AB USA and a professor at a Mayo Clinic and a distinguished author. We welcome you again, sir.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
Sir, can you briefly describe your professional journey for all our viewers?
Well, I started my undergraduation in engineering here in Manipur. I did my 4 years degree in electrical engineering. But I was always engrossed in understanding brain function and the building blocks of life. And so from engineering, I moved to Australia, where I initially started my medical training. And from there, from there onwards, I went on to do my PhD in neuroscience and neurophysiology and neuromodulation. And then I did my postdoctoral training fellowship in variety of areas, including molecular neuroscience, cellular neuroscience at Karolinska Institute in Sweden. And then I established a whole range of research models to examine neurodegenerative and neurodevelopmental disorders. And that's my pedigree in short. And now I'm leading the development of the next generation brain stimulation technology, brain-computer interface technology, how to wire the brain. The more and more we understand about the circuits in the brain, the more and more we can neuromodulate. Where there is a dysfunction in specific part of the brain, we can reverse that dysfunction through neuromodulation. And through these factors, we can reverse a whole range of disease. The most prolific example is Parkinson's disease, where we use deep brain stimulation therapy for reversing it. And it requires strenuous amount of neurotechnological development, from electrodes, from brain-computer interfaces, from sensing abilities, from instruments that can be implanted deep inside the brain. And so I'm involved in establishing these paradigms for NeuroNano. At the same time, I also am a faculty at Mayo Clinic.
So how do you define neurodiversity, and why is it important to consider neuromodulation usage?
The brain is highly compartmentalized. So when you say that the brain has got, say, 1.5 trillion neurons or 1 trillion neurons or 2 billion neurons, there is really no proper estimate of it, but it's quite a lot of cells over there. Not all cells are involved in everyday aspects of life. So compartmentalization of brain into the motor cortical area, the language cortical area, the autonomic area allows us to differentiate different properties of cells, understand how they interact with each other, and allows us to correct if there is any cellular pathology in these areas. So the diversity, what we call in the brain, is more topology. And that topology is a virtue by which we bring neuromodulation techniques to correct, say, for example, a wrongful hand behavior, or a Parkinsonian tremor, or an obsessive compulsive disorder. So the more and more we understand the diversity principles in the brain, the more therapy we can bring to brain dysfunction.
What motivated to focus mainly on this neurodivergent population?
Very simple answer to that. If I teach, when I was teaching medical students and I give them a brain in their hand and I ask them, what is this? They will all say it is a brain, but it is actually not a brain. It could be a John, it could be a Peter, it could be a Shanti, it could be a Hari. So you're basically holding an individual in the 2.5 kilograms of mass that you have there. Almost every aspect of that individual is enshrined in that brain space. You have all the organs, all the bones and muscles and everything, and then on the top of it you have the behavior, so which completes the formation of a human being. So if we want to understand humans, we have to understand the brain.
So what specific neuromodulation approaches are there that has been developed to address these neurodiversity?
So we can broadly divide the neuromodulation into two basic components. The non-invasive neuromodulation. They are age-old techniques. The first non-invasive neuromodulation was what we call electroconvulsive therapy, the shock therapy for common denomination. And then from then onwards, more focused therapy in the non-invasive field came about. So the latest invasive, non-invasive are transcranial magnetic stimulation, what we call TMS, direct current stimulation, TCDS, and then focused ultrasound. So those are the non-invasive components where I don't need to open the skull, we don't need to penetrate the brain and position a type of a stimulator in deep pockets of the brain. The second is the invasive neuromodulation, which is invasive surgery, where you have to open the brain, open the skull, of course, and then implant systems into the brain. That is what is called deep brain stimulation. So each one has its own merits, and depending on what exactly you're dealing with. If you have more generic states, for example, non-invasive neuromodulation like TMS is very often used for treatment of clinical depression or treatment-resistant depression. Whereas when it comes to Parkinson's, which is very specific, neuron specific, because the entire brain is not affected in Parkinson's. It's only a group of cells in a very circumscribed area, what we call the basal ganglia systems, which is affected in Parkinson's. And so if we can neuromodulate those cells, we would be in a position to reverse the symptoms of Parkinson's. For those areas, we would need what is called the deep brain stimulation, where we implant the stimulators or microchips or brain computer, whatever you may want to call it, in those very specific areas, and they have a pacemaker implanted in the shoulder area, and through that pacemaker, these are programmable pacemakers, so we can program which electrode has to stimulate in what direction, what should be the current, what should be the voltages, the frequency, how the second electrode has to respond to the first electrode stimulation. We can do a cascaded way of stimulating in such a way that we will be in a position to neuromodulate a group of cells and some pathways, connectomics based pathways, by which we are in a position to reverse the symptoms of Parkinson's.
How does neuromodulation improve precision compared to the conventional treatment modalities available for neurodiversity?
Well, the question I would rather ask you is, what conventional modalities do we even have?
We have speech therapy, there may be all these kinds of therapies are there. Speech is there, physiotherapies are there, occupational therapy is there.
Correct.
We are been aware of only these therapies and an ABA approach.
I'm very glad you mentioned these things. I mean, these are all for correcting specific aspects of behavior.
Yes.
So someone is unable to speak. The speech could be two components. One is unable to produce a sound, or unable to produce a syntax, or unable to combine two syntaxes to have a legitimate word coming out of the mouth. In the same case, in the occupational therapy or physiotherapy, someone is unable to bring certain level of muscular orientation, so you could have physiotherapeutic exercises. But we go behind these things. You're unable to speak because certain circuits in the brain are dysfunctional. We have a good understanding of where these circuits are. We have a very good understanding of how these circuits are wired to the second circuits that they are connected to. So we go directly to these circuits to see whether we can reverse some of the dysfunctionality, and then through which we are able to produce wonderful speech. For example, in the case of stroke patients, one of the challenging aspects of stroke is speech deficits following stroke. We cannot reverse stroke by neuromodulation, at least as of now, because our understanding of the precise circuits that are involved in the stroke is not very clear. For neuromodulation, we need target definition in the brain. We don't have that for stroke. We have it for Parkinson's, as I said, the basal ganglia circuits, but for stroke we don't have it. But we can correct the speech deficits in the stroke. That's one major symptom of the stroke. And those circuits, we know where they are. So if we are able to surgically reach those circuits, if we have sufficient granularity in the technology that we design to reach those circuits, we might be in a position to reverse the speech deficits that stroke patients undergo. And all these things cannot be very competently done by external therapy such as speech therapy, physiotherapy, or occupational therapy. These three therapies are more rehabilitative concepts.
Yes.
They don't address a central problem of some dysfunction in the brain, and that's where neuromodulation steps in.
But looks like this is there are, as you said, there are invasive and non-invasive also in this.
Correct.
So what are the what challenges might arise during these invasive or non-invasive modalities?
Rather than saying that as a challenge, neurosurgery has advanced extraordinarily, where we can do very precise implantation, wiring of the brain, and linking two components in the brain. To that extent, our neurotechnology solutions have evolved. When the challenges are, before you decide whether the patient, what the patient is suffering from or what the disease state is, we need to have very robust diagnosis. Just because a person is showing some type of a tremor does not mean that the patient has Parkinson's.
Yes.
Right? It takes quite a fair amount of diagnostic ability to arrive at the conclusion that the patient has indeed Parkinson's. It could be essential tremor, it could be geriatric tremor. That's one challenge before we go into neuromodulation, neurosurgical based intervention. The second challenge is post-operative or post-treatment measurement and monitoring of the patient. Some patients might require 3 to 4 months of continuous monitoring after a specific episode of treatment has been given to them. Some patients might require at least a year of monitoring. So long-term monitoring and long-term assistance to the patients following these interventions are important for us to undertake this neuromodulation therapy treatment. That's where the catch is.
Yes. So for the Indian population, actually these matters, the after and the before the surgery.
Absolutely, both prior and after. The Indian medical system has to slightly change to accommodate these principles, and the changes is about to happen. It's bound to happen and about to happen as well. For example, in the West we have what is called as a movement disorder specialization. So after MD, these fellows come and train abroad 2 to 3 years. They are heavily focused on research aspects of Parkinson's. For example, Parkinson's, one of the underlying factors of Parkinson's is Lewy body accumulation in the brain. It is an alpha-synucleinopathy. Components are involved in Parkinson's. So neurologists have to have a thorough understanding of what is alpha-synucleinopathy and how it is transmitted and where could be the origin of it, how to understand some of these components of it. And they need to understand the movement disorder aspects of it, how the brain is wired, and what if certain part of the wiring goes wrong, how the hand can move in a particular direction as against the direction it needs to move. So the neuroanatomy, neurophysiology, and the molecular dynamics of the brain has to be thoroughly understood for becoming a movement disorder specialist, and we have those fellowships in abroad, and those kind of training has to come to India to resolve the first challenge I told you,
yes,
that diagnostic aspects of it. And the diagnostic aspect also has a very huge impact on how and when and with what quantity you start a patient in levodopa. Levodopa therapy has become a very common therapy in India. I hear that patients are often subjected to 850 milligrams of levodopa, sometimes even 3 times a day. And so levodopa is a very interesting drug. It can do wonders, but at the same time, over amplification of levodopa can also lead to what is called dopamine toxicity. So a whole range of side effects can come in Parkinson's disease, which are not actually related to PD, but related to the application of the drug in a particular way. So the diagnostic virtues also bring how you determine the intervention to that particular patient. In the same case, if I go back to say, for example, application of TMS, which is a very growth-oriented area for treatment of depression. Now, there are certain regulations abroad in the United States and Europe that the patient has to be refractory to this many number of drugs before which a neuromodulation therapy can be brought in. And there are reasons why we have these checks and balances. Because what can be done through a pill, and if we are able to obtain good symptom reversal and management of the patient, we need to trial that first before we come back to neuromodulation therapy assessments. So again, understanding when does the depression become refractory and what are the various symptoms and growth symptoms of the depression. What are the patient management needs? Can behavioral therapy be used, as you mentioned,
Yes.
Before a neuromodulation therapy can be brought in? So those aspects quite heavily rely upon how we diagnose, the time we take to diagnose, and how we arrive at a clean slate diagnosis. For example, in the West, we often send the patient to two different physicians. And then physician A does not know that physician B does not know that the physician A has seen it. So the notes are compared. Is B also arriving at the same conclusion that A has arrived? Because this information is important for us to prescribe to that patient whether the patient should undergo a neuromodulation based therapy or not. Right? So those challenges also in the post therapeutic patient monitoring stages, it will reflect on different dimensions. So I strongly would recommend that the patient or the caregivers of the patients develop a very high awareness. Sometimes you may have to note down the symptoms on a day-to-day basis on a notebook. I see several patients when I come to India, and let me give you two examples. There was one patient with Parkinson's, but he was also suffering from orthostatic hypotension, and there was another patient with same Parkinsonian tremor, but he was suffering from apathy. So I often wonder whether there are two different phenotypes, because one has PD plus hypotension issues, the other one has PD plus psychiatric issues. And are they differentiated at a cellular level or a synaptic level or a neuronal level? So that is the neuroscience part of it. But we bring a treatment into it. If I'm going to prescribe levodopa, or if I'm going to subject the patient to a levodopa therapy, what aggravates and what comes down? Because these two are two different comorbidities that the patient has. So a thorough investigation and diagnosis is required before we can arrive at whether a neuromodulation therapy can be given.
How do you ensure this neuromodulation therapy do not pathologize the neurodivergent instead of supporting?
Well, that's a very good question. We have tremendous amount of growth of evidence. Let me not use the word tremendous. We have growing evidence that neuromodulation can actually induce what we call neural plasticity. Neuromodulation can actually produce neurotropic factors in the brain, what we call BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factors. These are protective factors in the brain that aids in the neuronal function. They are capable of rewiring brain circuits to assimilate brain function, transfer brain function, say from one circuit to the other, to compensate for loss of one circuit to take over in a different circuitry. So we have growing evidence that actually neuromodulation is neuroprotective in nature. Yes, there is pathology. There is no question about it. For example, long-term high-frequency stimulation or high-voltage stimulation can cause functional ablation of the circuits. But the circuits are already ablated to begin with. For example, in Parkinson's disease, there is a fair amount of cellular death in these areas that we are seeing. So we are actually stimulating and powering that area of the brain through the ablation that has already happened. There is a structural pathological situation that has already happened over there. So we are not creating a new pathology over here. We might be aggravating that pathology. But the benefits that you see as compared to what pathology that we may measure, the benefits far outweigh the pathology. Many patients can have a reasonably good quality of life after they have undergone DBS therapy for PD. We have not only seen DBS therapy not only for PD, we have also examined DBS therapy for, say, OCD, for depression. We are expanding the DBS therapy into the fields of vascular dementia, Alzheimer's, neurogenic hypertension. These are areas, the neurogenic hypertension is one area where despite any cocktail of drugs, it is not possible to control the heart rate. Right? So overall, we see tremendous amount of benefit as against DBS itself causing pathology.
How can accessibility and affordability be built into this advanced modulation therapy?
That's a very smart question. I think it's rather more for developing nations like India. Now, let me put it in two different ways. For us to bring, for example, I am at NeuroNano. The conventional DBS lead is 1.3 millimeters in the thick, and it is from a neuronal scale point of view, that lead is gross, because the neurons are only 50 to 60 to maybe 100 microns in diameter. So if I use a 1.3 millimeter lead, which is of course profoundly useful, you would be probably stimulating say 30,000 neurons, or more often you are stimulating the passages in the brain rather than neuronal circuits. But if I want to stimulate only a few group of cells to achieve the same benefit, and if not higher levels of benefit, I need to circumscribe my stimulation. So now at NeuroNano, we are looking at bringing out electrodes which is only 20 microns in thickness. So we dropped it down from 1.3 to 20 microns. But that does not come without a cost, right? It requires the cost of manufacturing, the cost of prototyping, what we call hematitic process, where it has to satisfy the FDA requirements and various quality control measures. By the time we bring it out, the cost often goes very high. So neurotechnology experts do not have a lot of window to worry about cost. We need to bring in a technology where we want to control the brain and regulate the brain. We want to get rid of, as much as possible, we want to get rid of drug therapy, because drug therapy for neurology, as we know, is very nefarious. It has a debilitating side effects, long-term effects and short-term effects. So we want to bring in more circuit-based neural therapy rather than pathology-based neural therapy, as in pharmacology, and that comes with a cost. But the factor that we need to bring in is how the Medicare systems of each country, for example in Australia, in Germany, or in the Medicare based countries, much of it is paid by the state. In the United States, insurance systems kick in, and insurance labors much of the cost of the therapy to the patient. Now for India needs to start to think about how we can amortize the cost of bringing high-end technology to the common man. So the government has to step in and regulate the field to a certain extent. So that is where the affordability of the system comes in. But down the line, as we engage more and more in this level of neural technology, I am sure that we would be in a position to bring that cost down, but that does not negate the government's responsibility to bring in certain benefit schemes to subsidize these treatments. Let me give you a balanced cross-balance example. Say you have 10 million Parkinson's patients in Udupi. What is the cost of managing them for the government of India, or for the municipal hospital, or what is the cost of it, right? As against what would be the cost of for government to support these patients to go for a high-end neurodiverse therapy. Because if these patients are reversed in their symptoms, they can go back to work. The government can bring the taxes back to them, because you're making the population far more useful. And if you allow these patients to grow, because there is no money for these patients to come and undertake a therapy, the burden on the government to house them, to institutionalize them, is going to increase even more.
Yes, definitely. What role can neuromodulation play in early identification or support without labeling or stigma?
The stigma I always find is with the society. When something that has been moving well suddenly stops moving, the people around that person take a step back.
Yes.
And that is where your stigma starts. Okay. Right? And PD is basically a movement disorder. But let us take the case of an Alzheimer's disease. It's one of the most debilitating diseases in the world, where if there is a rapid growth of Alzheimer's, the patient often forgets who he is or who she is. And nothing can be more worse than that. And then the patient cannot be maintained at home, cannot be let out of the house on a natural way. And the patient often has 8 to 10 years of life expectancy, and that is going to be a very, very debilitating way to death progressively. We don't have a drug, we don't have any therapy. As you said, behavioral, speech, none of these can be brought to these patients, right? Okay, let us go to the neurodevelopmental disorders like autism. Suddenly in a school, the child realizes that the kid is not able to hold the pen in a particular way. The stigma starts with the teachers. The teacher immediately identifies it as some problem with the neuromotor skill. They use these syntaxes, neuro, motor, right? So the stigma is always a social issue. For us neuromodulation experts, neuroscientists, neurosurgeons and neurologists, we don't see that as a stigma. For us, our life is until we die. We don't bring palliative concepts into the way we see a patient. We have had patients at the age of 65 implanted with electrodes in the brain. We've had patients with 70 also implanted with electrodes in the brain. So we don't see any stigma in any of these things. We are here only to help to bring the quality of life back to the patient. So I would not say that neuromodulation or neurosurgery or neurology or any of these things is associated with any type of stigma, as long as the parent, the teacher, the friends and the society do not bring that stigma into the clinic room.
Rightly said, sir. Do you have any examples where it has been quite a successful story in neurodivergent population?
Oh, several examples. For example, Parkinson's, PD. We have 300,000 patients walking around, roughly maybe 250,000 patients, I don't have the exact statistics, with the leads in their brain. And they've all gone back to their usual work and things to that. We have had children born with dystonia who have become athletes after implantation. We have had OCD cases, self-mutilatory behavior cases, who have gone back to do studies in college after reversal of much of these symptoms. We've been able to reverse many of the symptoms of Tourette syndrome, where the children are now having normal life as they go on. So neuromodulation is not about reversing any disease. It is about bringing quality of life back to them. And I can veritably say a lot of children and lot of adults have gone back to doing things that they have been doing.
Very, very promising. What regulatory frameworks are needed to protect neurodivergent individuals using these technologies?
Well, there are first the regulation from the government. I mean, that's one aspect of it as a neurological therapy, right? But much of the regulation comes with the medical councils that regulate the entire surgical therapy and neurotechnology development, etc., etc. For example, for us to bring an electrode for deep brain stimulation invasive, it is classified as a class 3 product. And a class 3 product, for us to bring a class 3 product out, it is millions and millions and millions of dollars of investment, right? Say for example, you want to do a 250 patient clinical study. Per patient cost would be anything between $25,000 to $40,000. So you're looking at that much amount of money to even complete the clinical study, examine the symptom changes, examine the safety aspects, etc., etc. So roughly what it takes for us to bring a particular electrode or a brain-computer interface, invasive one, into the market from the time of scratch to the market is roughly about 15 years. And the investment for that could run into $1 billion. For any company to invest that $1 billion to bring that out. I mean, you spoke about cost. Now, for example, we have to invest close to $500 million in order to do first develop the technology, prototype the technology, then go into proof of concept study, early feasibility clinical study. Sometimes we have to do a investigational device exemption study, we have to do a pre-market approval study, clinical trial study, we have to do a principal component analysis for us to complete all these sort of things and then do hematitic processing. FDA will ask for so many things. They are extremely concerned about the safety, which is rightfully so. So that will probably cost us $600–700 million. And then when we cost that product, that is where the challenges are, right? So that FDA regulation is one of the key principles for bringing any invasive neuromodulation therapy into the market. Medicine is a regulated system of thought. In Europe, we don't have private practice, very minimal. In Australia, we don't have private practice except consultancy, very minimal consultancy. The government regulates almost every aspect of healthcare, right? And that's why it is called a welfare state. Yes. That's why we are able to amortize cost. For example, the cost of a Herceptin positive drug that we now use, which has really done marvel for women. It has pushed their lifespan from 6 to 8 months to now 10 years or 20 years. The cost of the drug, they have to have an infusion every 4 weeks and forever. And that cost of every infusion will be about $5,000 to $6,000. But under the Australian government's pharmaceutical benefit scheme, it is offered to them at $500 or $600. Right? I'm not exactly correct on the dollar value, but it is heavily subsidized, right? Because the government sees the relevance of it. Because the type of women who develop Herceptin positive breast cancer will be at the age of 35 or 36. They have an entire life ahead of them. And if they become a patient, it's not going to be easy for a government to take care of it, institutionalize them, bring the welfare aspects to them, and allowing them to die. So we need to do something about it. So if we are able to bring that kind of a therapy and get these women back into the workforce, back into the family, it has more economic benefit to the government than the government spending or not spending on these patients. So this is the value economics that one need to understand. It is far more debilitating to spend on the disease than to rectify the disease, however costly the rectification may be.
So how do you envision neuromodulation in India? And in the next coming 10 years, what might be a progress?
There are significant opportunities for bringing neuromodulation in India because we have a growing population of PD patients. We have a growing population of vascular dementia patients, Alzheimer patients. So the growth factor is very high in these pathology. We do not even have systems like the West where they can be institutionalized and they can be taken care of. So the burden of taking care of these patients come down to the parents, to the children of these parents. But technically the children cannot take care of these parents beyond a certain point of time. Right? That's one sociological factors to it. Secondly, we have exemplary hospitals here. We have developed this neuromodulation in a couple of hospitals like Columbia Astor in Bangalore, Jaslok in Bombay, Columbia Astor. The reason why neuromodulation is not really prescribed to the patients is not because of the cost of the neuromodulation therapy. It is rather not having the awareness of what the neuromodulation therapy is all about. So we need to focus on how to bring that awareness to the neurologist. We need to train the next generation neurosurgeons and neurology to embrace functional neurosurgery opportunities. They may have to come and train abroad for a couple of years to understand brain targeting, brain wiring, adapting neurotechnology and BCI into the brain. They need to think beyond their times and they need to bring back these technology solutions back to India. That is where the deficiency is.
It's quite a lot. And how does this apply to neurodivergent population as well? Like how do we spread awareness among them about this?
You are right now. This is the only way.
Yes.
There is no other way. I mean, we often organize as conferences, but the conferences is not open to public. So a few experts get together, they talk about it, and then they forget about it after that. Publications, scientific publications are not in the public domain, and even if it is in the public domain, it is not designed for the public to read. Mass campaigns, like what exactly you're doing now, showing them some videos of what a neuromodulation technique is and how it has changed the life of a human being. I have been giving so many seminars in Manipal. The other day I gave a lecture on neuromodulation to a faculty there, and there was one person who had come from outside, and she came and told me that she is not a faculty in KMC, but she has been living with urge and bladder cystitis and urge incontinence for the last 16-17 years. She has been refusing to lie in the same bed as her husband because she is scared of when she will void. And she has not spoken about this either to her doctor or to her husband. This has created a lot of issues in her family. and she was asking me, can you put something in my brain and reverse this problem? Right? So, this is something that the mass media and people like you can do.
Thank you for that. And what risks so the society should be mindful about using this technology?
Well, society does not really have a risk, because when we decide that this patient has to undertake neuromodulation therapy, for example, a person has got Parkinson's disease. Let me take PD as an example, and I could also enlarge this if you need later on with other disease states. But PD is a perfect example. Often the PD patient goes through levodopa therapy for a couple of years. We don't put a lead in the brain straight away, or we don't recommend putting a lead in the brain. If it can be controlled through safe application of drugs, yes. But PD is a growth disease. It will not stop there. It will continuously grow and develop different types of comorbidities will start to come. For example, many PD patients will have eye fixation. Many PD patients have what is called diplopia, where they will have hallucination when they look at something. It's a comorbidity, pituitary based disorder that combines itself with PD. Many PD patients have apathy, psychiatric issues, cardiovascular issues, urinary incontinence, incontinence, fecal incontinence, sleep apnea. Many PD patients have got extreme level of insomnia. Right? So all these are growth factors in the PD. So PD's visible phase is your tremor. The invisible phase is all these metabolic autonomic dysreflexia that grows, and finally it leads to dysreflexia, where the PD patient cannot eat normally and you need to put a Ryle tube to make him eat, or else there will be a gag reflex, and then towards pulmonary aspiration pneumonia and towards terminality. Right? So how much of awareness of the disease itself that patient has, the primary care physician has to educate him. That's where it starts. Right? You have a PD, but this is your trajectory of the PD. That is a simple trajectory. There could be deviations. I'm not saying that this could happen. I'm not saying this will happen, this will happen. I'm saying this could happen. Many patients, they come to me in India and they say, my doctor never told me this. My doctor said he's prescribing me some drug. I think you'll be fine in 2 to 3 years, but in 2 to 3 years I find that I'm not able to have proper urination. Right? So the information flow and the mitigation of risks should start at the general practitioner level. One big advantage of India is that you have a general practitioner, what is called family doctor, and we almost have got rid of that family doctor practice in the West. We don't have one, whereas you have one, and that is a big asset that you have that we do not have. So using that asset, a continuous monitoring of the patient on a monthly level, a small visit to the house, sometimes you go in a sublime way to examine the patient, you can find what exactly he is undergoing. So this level of patient care, if you are able to bring in, then the stigmas that are associated with any surgical therapy or any interventional therapy that I may bring in will simply not exist.
What age factors can this be used in, especially because neurodivergence starts from barely at a very young age? Well,
deep brain stimulation, if you talk about it, deep brain stimulation we have done for pediatric children with epilepsy, something that we cannot control by drugs, because drug therapy for epilepsy, they have a hell amount of side effects. It often numbs the child, it often makes a child just sit at home and do nothing. Whereas a child has to be going to the school, it has to aid in the social development of the child. So in extreme cases, we do deep brain stimulation to bring that quality of life back. We start with the vagal neuromodulation, and then following vagal neuromodulation, if there is a necessity for DBS, we bring that DBS in. There is also a resection surgery that is practiced all over, including in India, they practice it. And I was having a chat with one of the ex-surgeons at KMC, and he said he used to do resection surgery. But one of the things that he pointed out to me, which I already know, one of the things he pointed out to me, he said, Doctor, I'm never sure how much to remove, because where exactly the epilepsy originates in the brain is unknown. So I'm never sure how much of brain tissue to remove. That is what is called resection, in order to bring the epilepsis down. Sometimes if I remove more, then the child will have a range of cognitive and behavioral and motor deficits. The child might, the epilepsy might come down from say 100% or 80% to 40%, but the child may have difficulty in writing, in reading, or having attention deficit disorder or dyslexia. So these are side effects of removing brain tissue. So removing brain tissue is never a good way to do anything. You've been given 2.5 kilograms for a reason. Removing that is going to create more issues, unless otherwise you have a tumor or a stroke where I need to remove it for saving you from terminality at that particular point of time. So we have done DBS for even pediatric children, dystonic children. And so there is really no age factor that we consider from point of view. Each patient is treated in a very unique way. So they go through a whole range of diagnostic assessments before the neurologist, the neurosurgeon decide that that candidate is eligible for neuromodulation.
And once installed, what is the lifespan of that?
So the lifespan of the lead is until the patient passes away naturally, right? But the pacemaker, that's a programmable lead. So a lead, conventional current DBS lead has got 8 electrodes, and each electrode can be each electrode can stimulate. So electrode A, I can use it for stimulating with 1.5 milliamps, electrode B with 0.6 milliamps. So we can program. So they are called programmable devices, right? So that programmable device, those electrodes are actually powered by what we call a pulse generator. That pulse generator often requires replacement, and that depends on how heavy the use is. So if you're going to be stimulating the brain at say 5 milliamps 24 hours a day, the use is going to be very high. But these pulse generators can be charged very regularly. So there is a charging approach, so the patient charges it himself or herself. So the longevity of the pulse generator often comes 8 to 10 years. And that is when the pulse generator needs replacement, that's the only replacement the patient has to step in. And that's a very, rather, it's not a neurosurgery, it's more a clavicular surgery, because most of the pulse generators are positioned in the chest here.
Okay, that's very promising actually. But how would you define a success in neurodivergent viewpoint?
What does the patient want? The success, when we say, we look at what exactly the patient wants, right? The patient wants his tremor to stop. The patient wants the ability to get back to work or do what he does normally. I've known patients who have done marathons after DBS and things like that. So the success heavily depends on what symptoms we can bring down. So if PD has got say 20 or 30 odd symptoms, and we basically examine it from which is a dominant symptom, which is a subservient symptom. Not every symptom can be brought down, but the major symptoms can be eliminated to a large extent for an extended period of time, and that defines a success.
Is there any intervention, is there any other complications because of this in the developmental milestone?
When you mean complications because of the neurosurgic device treatment, so far, touch wood, we have not had any complication.
Okay. So, last but not the least, would you like to share some piece of advice for our local people here? Like how can this neuromodulation be very effective for the children who are on spectrum? Let me start with the detection of the autism spectrum first. Often facial recognition is often used as an indicator for detection of autism spectrum, but apart from that there are many. And so the physician needs to be trained to examine that. Right? For example, a baby is lying before me and the baby is having a very untoward movement of the pinky finger away from the middle finger and tapping it on the floor. That could be a specific symptom for me because I understand certain aspects of motor control at that age. I'm not saying that's a symptom for autism, but that's a very strange behavior that I could start to monitor how progressively it happens, how many times it happens, how many instances with which it happens. So every aspect of the baby's movement and the head movement, head rotation aspects have to be very carefully examined by mothers particularly.
Um, when I say mothers, because they have a more hormonal way, intuitive hormonal way of examining them rather than the fathers do. So that's a biological entity principle, but where both parents have to be equally involved in that. That's first aspect. The second aspect is in that stage of 3 to 4 months where some of these symptoms very elegantly manifest. It could be cerebral palsy, it could be Down syndrome, it could be X-fragile syndrome, it could be autism, it could be something else. So it is very difficult to differentiate what it is by just looking at one particular symptom. So a collateral level of symptoms have to be examined. Most pediatricians often tend to see children from a hypotonia, GDD as you said, these sort of aspects of it. So it becomes sometimes difficult, sometimes we increase the time by which we arrive at a particular point, and that time can be very, very frustrating and excruciating for a parent, particularly the mother. It is really difficult for a mother to survive the fact that a child is born like that, and then it takes 5 to 6 years to even know what the child could be suffering from or what dysfunction the child brain has, and that's the other aspect of it, right? And so for that you really need a competent level of pediatric neurologist with a very high-end training in ASD to examine that. Just like we have movement disorder specialist, we have an autism specialist in neurology, and they often talk to the to your pediatrician to bring a range of composite understanding of it. Okay, once you have decided that, you need to start exploring interventions. For example, we have very high level of data to show that when we do focused ultrasound, and we can open the blood-brain barrier. But if there is a possibility of reversing certain proteins that are expressed in autism disorders, for example beta-catenin, through this focused ultrasound, that can bring a whole range of benefit to the child. We are trialing transcranial magnetic stimulation as of today. We are trialing that in the United States for reversing certain aspects of autism. We are trialing TCDS. We are searching for targets in the brain that could be an epicenter for autistic behavior. So if autistic behavior has got both cognitive, speech and motor therapy, we are not focused on autism. We are focused on, can we reverse a speech element of it? Can we reverse the motor element of it? Can we bring urinary continence element into it? So this is the way we go about doing things, and interventions have expanded enormously, and the future is highly hopeful. But the problem in India is that the awareness that these treatments possibilities are available. So you have a child which detected as autism at the age of 5, but we might be able to treat the child when the child is 15 years old or 16 years old, because those technologies will be available at that time. We might have a better understanding of the child's contours between 5 and 15 years. So I often ask the parents to be highly hopeful, first of all, and keep looking out where the directions of treatments are, interventions are going, and not just only rest on the regular speech and physiotherapy and occupational therapy that you bring from externally, from outside. They can continue in complement with the new interventions that we can bring in. Deep brain stimulation one day will crack autism. I am very confident of it, because we are searching for these circuits continuously. How these circuits are changed in a state like autism, how the genetics connects with the neurons, which connects with that functionality and connects with the behavior. We are continuously working on it, and at some point of time, if it has taken us 20 to 30 years to arrive at that target definition for PD, I am sure we can arrive at the same target definition for autism in due course of time, and I believe that time is not too far.
Okay.
So keep looking, keep chasing, keep pestering your pediatrician so that he can look for you. There are so many clinical trials that sometimes crop up here and there. Ask them to see whether anything is elsewhere available, some trialing that can be done, reversal of specific symptoms that we can do. So neuromodulation offers a lot of hope for neurodevelopmental disorders, and I believe we can crack it.
Really, it sounds very promising. And yes, all parents and caregivers have to have a complete knowledge on this. or if not complete, at least some knowledge that yes, there is hope. We have to explore. There are a lot of invention happening in terms of neuromodulation as an example. So go for such treatments and find out the risk factors, and you will have a very good response from it. So this is also one of the treatment modalities which are available for neurodivergent population. Thank you, sir, for giving such a wonderful insight on this topic, and I truly enjoyed the whole process of this, the explanation and all of it. Thank you.
I have a special thanks to Dr. Virupaksha Devramani and Dr. Nagraj for getting me here. Yeah, Dr. Bandari, P.V. Bandari from Balik Hospital.
So thank you. Thank you from all the viewers as well, and Autism Society of Udupi.